Paul, thank you for stopping by. To begin
Always
with,
a pleasure.
Can you just briefly outline the two futures you see before us right now?
Yeah, look, it's pretty clear. We're coming to that proverbial fork in the road in this country. It's a function of debt. It's a function of economics. It's a function of the tipping point of more and more people becoming takers versus makers in America. And the way I see it is, if we don't like the direction the president's taking the country, which we don't, I think it's a path of a government-centered society, a path of debt and decline. What we owe the countries, if we don't like this direction, is show them an alternative. Get those principles that made America great in the first place, those founding principles: liberty, freedom, free enterprise, self-determination, government by consent of the governed. Apply them to the problems of the day, this debt crisis, and get back to prosperity, get back to the American dream, get back to upward mobility, get back to an opportunity society. And that's what we owe the country, that choice. And if they select this path, then we have the right and the obligation and authority to put it in place next year before we actually have a debt crisis.
Why is it that your kind of approach is always portrayed as taking something away?
I think everybody would like to make this as if we're taking a trip to the dentist. You know, I think everybody wants to think that we're selling austerity and pain. Quite the opposite. What we're selling is growth, we're selling opportunity, we're selling prosperity. And austerity and pain is what you get if you go down the path the president's proposing. If you keep running up the tab, borrowing way beyond our means, and then having these massive tax increases, which will just shut down growth in this country, then you fall into the European austerity mode, where you have no choice but to please the bond markets by cutting benefits for current seniors, cutting benefits for current recipients of government aid, and cranking up taxes even further to please bond markets, which simply slows down your economy. What we're saying is we want to preempt austerity. We want to prevent that kind of pain and get back to growth. And you got to reform these 20th century social insurance programs so that they don't bankrupt us in the 21st century, so that they can meet their mission of health and retirement security, but do it in a way so that we can actually fulfill the promise of health and retirement security. And we think these reforms we're proposing are the best ways of doing it.
Quickly on Social Security, you don't propose taking away benefits from those who are on the system or about to go on the system, nor do you propose changes in benefit formulas for people who are on the system today?
No, that's right. So I've always said we can still afford to grandfather those who are currently on the Social Security program. Actually, we can grandfather people who are in and near retirement. And so the changes need to occur prospectively for the younger generations like myself, who, by the way, on Social Security, when we run out of trust fund bonds, you have a 23% across-the-board cut that occurs automatically in law. That's coming in law. We ought to prevent that from happening. We ought to preempt that. And so what we're saying is, if you act now on these entitlement programs like Social Security, these reforms need to be, they're phased in. They're not harsh and immediate and sudden. They're phased in and grandfathered so that people can have time to organize their lives around the promise of these programs, which right now are kind of empty promises.
Now, in 2005, President Bush made an attempt to reform Social Security. One of the things that seemed to have derailed the effort was changing the benefit formula for those on the system. You avoid that in your plan. Yeah,
because first of all, Social Security is not the biggest driver of our debt. It's really the healthcare entitlement programs.
Right.
Second of all, its finances are demographically driven in a way where it's going insolvent, but it doesn't have the compounding problem of health inflation like you have with the healthcare entitlements. And the other part I would say is President Bush, to his credit, ran a fantastic re-election campaign in 2004, but it was not premised on doing Social Security reform. I think for big changes like this, you need to go to the country with a plan and a mandate, run on that plan and that mandate, so that if you win that affirming election, then you have the wherewithal to do it. That's what did not happen in 2004, and that's what has to happen now if we're going to avoid a debt crisis.
Now, on Medicare, you've also made it clear in your latest iteration of it that those who want traditional Medicare continue to do so. How does it work?
So what we say is, if you're in or near retirement, if you're 55 and above, we propose no changes to your Medicare program. It stays as it is today, and we get rid of the Obamacare damages it does to Medicare. Obamacare takes $500 billion from Medicare to spend on Obamacare, and then it puts this board of 15 unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats in charge of putting price controls on Medicare, which will lead to denied care for current seniors. We get rid of all that, keep the benefit as it is right now for people who are 55 and above, but then those of us who are 54 and below, when we become Medicare eligible, We propose converting Medicare to a system that works like the one we have in Congress. It's called premium support. The Medicare guarantee continues because you get a choice of guaranteed coverage options, private plans or a traditional Medicare fee-for-service option that you can select from, and then Medicare subsidizes your premium based on who you are. More for the poor and the sick, less for the wealthy. Doing it that way, having the senior citizen, the beneficiary of Medicare, as the decision maker, where the providers compete against each other for her business, brings choice and competition into this program, which is so desperately needed in healthcare. And the alternative is this president's board of basically rationing. So we don't want to have 15 bureaucrats running Medicare, making the decisions. We want 50 million seniors in a marketplace with the power of a Medicare guarantee, choosing which plan is best for them.
And for younger people, how would Medicare be financed in the future?
Well, the financing is the same, which is we have a payroll tax.
2.9%?
Yes, so we don't propose to change the Medicare payroll tax. What we propose is this competitive system where you, like I have as a member of Congress, you have a choice of comprehensive plans to pick from. Those plans compete for your business, and that act of choice and competition has proven, where we've applied it, like the Part D benefit, to bring down costs and increase quality. And Medicare will subsidize your premium based on who you are. It's a circumscribed, premium support that's based on need, and that, according to Medicare's, CBO and actuaries, helps us save the system from collapse.
One of the things it would seem to do is change the way health care is done in this country.
Yeah.
We don't have real free markets in health care. So if you go on the trajectory we're on, where you don't have those free market forces of productivity and innovation, the thing spins out of control.
Yeah. It's 16% of our economy, but it doesn't operate like any other part of our economy because it's missing those free market principles: transparency on price, transparency on quality, and an economic incentive to act on those things and hold producers accountable. In manufacturing and every other aspect of our economy, we can show how you can improve quality and reduce cost, but not in healthcare because we displace those principles from working in healthcare. I co-authored a law, an amendment in 2003 that created something called health savings accounts. I spent my first years in Congress trying to get HSAs into law. They're now in law. Obamacare basically pretty much destroys the whole entire HSA concept. But the concept is get the consumer back in the center of the equation on healthcare. The reason I can see you so well and read your notes on your paper is because I got LASIK surgery 12 years ago. It's an out-of-pocket expenditure, and because of that, LASIK surgery now at the place I got it is half as expensive, but 3 times as good. They've revolutionized this excimer laser. They've made it cheaper and better. And so it's not as if healthcare is not immune from these free market principles working, it's just that they haven't been applied, and that's what we want to do.
Now, how do you do it with the rest of healthcare? Because right now it's still employer provided, or if you're below a certain income level, government. So
our budget doesn't go into
third party.
We don't go into that great kind of detail. We propose lots of things like interstate shopping for health insurance, expanding HSAs and medical liability reform, more transparency on price and quality. And my own personal view, and I've authored legislation on this in the past, is we need to equalize the tax treatment of health care so that you're no longer discriminated against getting health care if you don't get it from your job. Right now, the tax benefit is attached to your job, but what if you're unemployed or what if you're self-employed? You don't get the same kind of tax benefit. So what we want to do is reattach that tax benefit to the person instead of to the job so that we have more of a portable system. We have a system that has more choice and competition and more options.
How do you overcome fears if people begin to hear, gee, in the future he doesn't want the place of business to provide it? How am I supposed to cope?
Where this gets confused all the time is they think that we're suggesting that businesses can no longer write off of their taxes providing health care to their employees. That's not the case. I've always said we need to continue to allow businesses to write off, to deduct the cost of providing health insurance to their employees. Nobody's suggesting to change that. The question is the employee. Does the tax benefit that they get when they get health insurance, is it attached to the job or to themselves? I'd rather attach it to themselves so that they don't have job lock, so that they're free to move from job to job or go work for themselves, or if they lose their job, they still have this benefit. I think that's a better system that brings more choice and competition and does nothing to disband the notion of employer-sponsored health insurance. We let people decide whether they want it or not that way.
Do you think that dynamic, by keeping that in place, will lead to eventually real free enterprise in healthcare?
I do think it will lead to free enterprise in healthcare because you'll get the kinds of reforms in the healthcare sector that have been so successful in all these other sectors of our economy. Transparency, shopping incentive, the question is basically this: do we want to have a system where the providers of health care?
So in essence, employer-provided health care will wither away into...
No, I don't think so. I think it's up to I think you decide. I think if an employer wants to offer it to their employees, they'll still have the same economic incentive to do so. And if the employees want to have their employer-sponsored health insurance, they'll apply their tax benefit to that to cover their premiums and copays and out-of-pockets. But if they want to have their own plan that they can buy around the country, you know, like we have lizards selling us car insurance, you know, on TV,
right,
they should have the freedom to do that as well. And the point I'd say is we want to get this system back toward having the providers of healthcare, whether it's insurers or doctors or hospitals, we want them competing against each other for our business, based on price, based on quality, like every other aspect of the free market economy, where we can work to make sure that we improve quality and lower costs. And that, to me, is one of the keys to getting at the root cause of health inflation. And if we can get at the root cause of health inflation, well, gosh, that's the biggest thing we could do to avoid a debt crisis in this country.
Looking at the future on the tax side, is it realistic now? Has the time finally come when
I think so.
there's a consensus on
You've been Sisyphus on this issue. You've been pushing this rock up the hill only to see it roll down again and push it up the hill. We need to win this election, I think, and have a pro-growth president. And I think Mitt Romney's in the right place to do that. That's point number one. Point number two, the tax code is basically imploding in January. And so where better than the opportunity than this to put in place fundamental tax reform? We can't keep patching it. We can't keep doing temporary this and temporary that. Entrepreneurs need some certainty. Employers need to know what the world's going to look like in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road to make big decisions. Tax reform is the secret to this. And I really believe we will unlock so much growth potential in this country if we reform our tax system. Let's not fall prey to this politics of envy and division. Let's get back to growth and opportunity, and let's put these programs in place, and then we can get the American idea back on track. I'm convinced of it.
Is Mitt Romney going to then formally advocate more private sector initiatives in healthcare so that this election will be a mandate? People
I think
say,
that's right.
Okay,
I do.
It's going to come.
I think that is exactly right. On Medicare reform, he's been embracing the same kind of proposals we're talking about with Medicare. He's been talking about consumer-directed healthcare reform. He's a big advocate of HSAs. On taxes, he's been talking about reducing rates and broadening the base, which is sort of the secret to success for any kind of comprehensive tax reform plan.
And the Democrats, put the White House aside for the moment. You've worked with Democrats, Simpson Bowles and others. Senator from Oregon, Wyden.
That's right.
Not known as a raging conservative.
No.
Do you feel that outside of the White House, the Democrats get it?
Yeah, I think there are what I would call this generation's Bill Bradleys. I think there are some Dick Kephardts. Remember, those are the two guys who made 86 tax reform possible.
Right.
I think there are Democrats like that. They're not in the majority in their party, and they're not in the leadership in their party, but they're in their party. And what I hope to see happening is 2013 is where we realize this consensus, where we include those kinds of Democrats into a coalition to fix this country's biggest problems, and where they agree with the premise of our arguments, such as tax reform, broaden the base, lower the rates, this kind of choice within Medicare reform and healthcare reform. I think there are Democrats who agree with this, but right now, their party leadership is so out to the left of center, they're in such political attack mode that they're just not willing to poke their head above the foxhole for fear of getting shot by their own party. And so that's why I think we have to have an election and then include them in this kind of a coalition.
Where do you think, obviously it can't go in their minds, but where do you think this is going to go? They see the same numbers. Is it just a short-term election thing, and then after the election they'll see the light, or do they really believe you can just go the way of Greece?
I don't know the answer to that. I think the president sees the sequester replacing his budget. I think he sees the tax increases that he would like to have coming automatically. I think he believes that if he can just stop us from winning this election, he can get his health care law in place. In Wisconsin, people refer to this as the third wave of progressivism. The Progressive Party was founded in Wisconsin, so we're pretty familiar with these ideas.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're familiar with these ideas. I think they believe they're on the cusp of realizing a great progressive transformation of this country, what I would call away from the traditional American idea of a limited government free enterprise system to more of a European style sort of social democracy. And I think they think they're on the cusp of that if only they can win this election. I think there's some truth to that. I think this is one of those once-in-a-generation elections where America picks a trajectory that will define this country for a long, long time.
Thank you. Good luck.
You bet. Thanks, Steve.